Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Sheboygan County Housing Coalition Town Hall Series 1, Building a Foundation of Knowledge. Tonight we'll be focusing on bridges out of poverty as well as our A.L.I.C.E population. My name is Abby Reese. I am representing the Sheboygan County Housing Coalition as the moderator this evening. Covering bridges out of poverty, we will have Joe and Emily. Covering A.L.I.C.E, we will have another Emily. This Emily is from the United Way, the other Emily is from the Housing Coalition, as well as Joe's from the Housing Coalition. And then we have Tracy talking about her lived experience as somebody in A.L.I.C.E, and you'll get to know that a little bit more. Just kind of a housekeeping reminder tonight, please keep your microphones muted until the end. After the presentations, we will have some time for questions and comments. Please keep questions and comments relevant to the subject topic, as well as respectful for everybody. Thank you so much. Yeah, Emily, are you intro?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Emily Quindy. I am the co-chair for the Housing Coalition for Sheboygan County. I've been part of the Housing Coalition for about 20 years on and off, and I've been the chair for close to a year at this point. We've had several conversations about finding ways to support our community and finding ways to be more of an action-oriented coalition. So if this is something that you feel strongly about and you'd like to become a part of, we will give you opportunities to contact us at the end so that we can get you on our list. We meet once a month, the third Tuesday of every month at 9 a.m. We've been meeting virtually, which we find has been more accessible for most people in the community. Tonight, we will be talking about understanding poverty and how it relates to homelessness. Our next session, because this is a series of 4 sessions, will be on the 3rd of February. That will be understanding the spectrum of housing on February 3rd. Our next session after that will be February 17th, which will be understanding the ideas towards solutions. And our final session will be on March 3rd, which we're going to talk about understanding through lived experiences, which will be a panel. So if your questions don't fall under any of the other 3 topics and you really feel like you have questions or comments that you want to be heard, the panel might be the place to have those discussions. Also, as you noticed when you signed up for the event, there was an opportunity to submit pre-questions. So if you submitted questions for this session and they are not relevant to the session, we will answer them as we move forward. Tonight, we're going to start talking about bridges out of poverty. So we're looking at really the idea of putting a face to poverty and what all the pieces of this entail. And Joe is going to begin that discussion.
Hello, my name is Joe Cruz, and I am on the Housing Coalition, but also I'm a volunteer at St. Vincent de Paul, and I work with the Warming Center. I'm a trained bridges person, so we work at systemic change, and so we're working to everyone to understand what poverty is about and also about its relationship with the housing issues and housing insecurities. It's really much more than what's involved with housing. It has a lot to do with people, systems, beliefs. And so we have a TED Talk, which is done by a woman out of Fond du Lac. It's the Fond du Lac TED Talk. So it's very local. And her name is Laurice Schneider. And she's going to talk about some of the challenges that she has faced through housing insecurities, but also poverty. And as you view this, I would like for you to think about what are some of the things that she's talking about, the interactions and the connections which Bridges is all about. It's about understanding those. So we're going to listen to this TED Talk. It's about 14 minutes in length, but I think you'll find it pretty informative. So, Scott?
You can be anything you want to be. How many of you have heard this growing up? And how many of you believe that? Truly believe that you could be anything you want to be, anything you put your mind to, right? Well, as a young girl growing up in a downtown neighborhood, being raised by a single mom of 4 kids, Do you want to know what I heard when people would say this? I heard, white rich kids, you can be anything you want to be, but poor black girls like you don't deserve nothing. Like when I would go to the gas station to buy my favorite candy after earning a report card to be proud of, oftentimes I was met by expressions of disgust by the cashier as I placed my paper food stamps on the counter, one by one, as if I had just ripped somebody off. Or when I would go home at night to turn on the television, and I saw people who looked like me and lived in neighborhoods like mine were either criminals, gangbangers, drug dealers, as if those were my only options in life. Be anything you want to be? Yeah, right. Or when I would go to my advanced placement classes in high school, and I was the only one there who had brown skin and hand-me-down, no-name clothing, and the backpack I used the year before, the message was clear. You don't belong here. So what were my options in life? What could I do as a young girl growing up in welfare? And I'm talking straight up welfare. Monthly cash assistance, housing allowance, food stamps, weekly trips to the food pantry. How was I supposed to be anything I want to be? What does that even look like? But here I am, actually living a life that I'm proud of. I have a successful career that's rewarding in the field of education. I have a beautiful family with a supportive husband and 2 amazing little girls. I own a home and drive a car that I paid for. And I managed to put myself through college, so far earning a master's degree. For some of you, this may seem like no big deal. It's the kind of life you expected. It's what you were exposed to as a young child. It was already your lived experience. But not me. To be honest, I didn't even know this kind of life existed. I had no idea. And through my adulthood, people constantly asked me, how did you make it out of poverty? How did you survive? What's the secret? And I used to just shrug my shoulders and say, I don't know, luck, I guess. But then as I started working with students and families living in poverty in some very similar situations as my own, I started to take notice, and I started studying those around me, as well as doing a deep analysis of my own life. And I realized that poverty is not about money, nor is it about having a great job, not at all. Poverty is about the lack of opportunity and the belief that you actually have control over your own life story. It's about having access to opportunities with forward momentum. It's about people believing in you and giving you the chance to do something great. It's about feeling support from those around you when you really doubt that you have what it takes. And who has the power to control this? Each and every one of you. Everyone can offer hope and inspiration, love, encouragement, and support to individuals who've been marginalized, victimized, alienated, or discriminated against. You all have the power to do that. It's so impactful. You just have to take notice of those around you and be willing to step out of your comfort zone in situations that may seem unfamiliar. Everyone can do this, and it seems so simple. Throughout my life, I've had a number of individuals who have provided selfless support and guidance throughout my entire lifetime. They believed in me and no matter what, and taught me how to be resilient against the ills of the world. It didn't matter that my family relied on government assistance for survival and that my mom was raising 4 biracial children by herself. All that mattered was that we went to school every day, tried our very best, and we treated everyone, including ourselves, with dignity and respect. Individuals like my first grade teacher, who always told me how smart I was and how lucky she felt that I was in her class. She replaced constant societal messages with, you're a failure, and you're lazy with, you're gonna be great. Or my brother's reading teacher, who encouraged me to be a leader at just 9 years old by giving me the responsibility of childcare during family education nights so that parents and caregivers could come together and learn the strategies to help their children become more successful readers. Or my city bus driver, the number 3 Mather I'll never forget, who during each winter holiday would plan a special night with my mom, providing commentary on the regular bus route, pointing out all the beautiful holiday lights and decorations, and that was something my family looked forward to every year. And my beat cop in my neighborhood, who got his buddies together and sponsored me for an all-star basketball tournament that my family couldn't afford. I was so excited when I got the call inviting me to participate, but once I saw the cost, I stopped talking about it because I knew bringing it up to my mom would just perpetuate a downward cycle of depression and guilt when there were things that she couldn't afford that us kids wanted. But he knew how important it was and helped me out, even though in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big deal at all. And my high school geometry teacher, who was the first person to mention college to me, and my response, oh me, I'm not going to college. That's for rich kids and we're on welfare. She said, college is for you, and that's non-negotiable, and supported me every step of the way until I walked across that university stage, and she was so proud of me. And then there was my general manager at my first job, who taught me the importance of developing a good work ethic. He believed that I was a leader and invited me to participate in the management training program before I was even 18 years old. He invested in me. What a powerful message to send to a young person. Through these acts, these individuals made me feel like my life mattered, like I had a purpose in this world. It was something I didn't get on a regular basis. So why does all of this matter? Why should we care? Why is this important? Because if we don't, there can be devastating consequences. And at the young age of 58, my mom paid the ultimate price. After years of poor nutrition, poor health care, high stress, and the lack of adequate support for her own mental health needs, a lifetime of poverty literally killed her. And like so many daughters in this world, I totally idolized my mom. I looked up to her so much. She taught me what it meant to be selfless in service and that education was truly the key to success. So much so that 2 years before she died, she enrolled in the technical college to pursue a degree in nursing, earning all A's and B's her first semester. She always used to say, "We may be poor, but we're not dumb. We have a brain, and the world needs us to use it." She figured that since all of her kids took the opportunity to go to college, that it was her turn. She wanted to be an advocate for those she considered voiceless because she said their needs never seemed to be heard by those making decisions. And sadly, she never got to see her dream become reality. If there's one thing that I've learned in my life, it's this: that people need to be validated and empowered, but not saved. It's about helping people achieve the goals that they want to achieve and not determining what their goals should be. When you look through your own lens of your own values, you might have good intentions, but it can have very ill effect. For example, a couple of years ago, I was working with a high school student who was identified by the courts as a child in need of protection or services. He was 16 years old, and his family had basically abandoned him. He was homeless. It was a couple weeks before the winter holidays, and a colleague came forward interested in providing him a temporary place for him to put his head down at night. So I participated in this meeting to explore this opportunity to see if this could be a possibility. And at some point during the meeting, my colleague turned to the student and said, I just really hope that this process can go fast because I want you to have a nice Christmas." And later that day, that student came down to my office, just completely upset. He started pacing back and forth, and I asked him, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And I looked at him, and his eyes welled up with tears, and he said, "Man, these people don't get me. I don't want to have a nice Christmas. I don't care about all that. I want someone to love me, make me feel like I matter, make me believe I can be somebody, and instead of making me feel like I'm a frickin' joke, a burden, and some poor little kid that someone's got to take home tonight." That experience was so impactful. Thinking about what people need just to survive the day sometimes can be so basic. Love, feeling wanted. What she thought he needed wasn't what he needed at all. A couple of years ago, my husband and I started volunteering at the emergency warming shelter, and it was quickly evident by a simple need that the guests displayed, the need for a listening ear, something that we all have the ability to offer, but we don't always maximize by that. And we found great joy each week listening to the awesome stories of individuals who treated us like friends, and for the most part, were living in very dark places. Socializing with our peers, such a vital part of human nature. And to think some people go day in and day out, isolated from this basic experience. Why? Because they're not in our social circle? Belief is the single most powerful tool that you can do to disrupt the cycle of poverty and provide individuals with the confidence that they can and will succeed. And I am proof of that. I wouldn't be standing here proudly today had others not believed in me and shown me the way. And everyone can tell someone else that they matter and that they will get through the tough times. It's self-efficacy, which is a top trait of successful people, the belief that you can do it. It's amazing just to think the belief that you can do it. I want to share a quote by Dr. Chaim Ginat, which has shaped the way I see the world and the impact I have the opportunity to make on the precious lives around me every day. If we see people as they are, we make them worse. If we see people as they ought to be, we help them to become what they are capable of becoming. So as Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change that you wish to see in the world. And that is truly how I live my life, both personally and professionally. I take notice of those around me and do whatever I can to break down the barriers. We must act with purpose in order to end this devastating cycle. To those of you battling the cycle right now, please don't give up. The battle is worth it. Trust yourself, and yes, you do deserve the life that you want to live. Sometimes I have to just laugh thinking about my life now and how different it used to be. Just the other day, well, every day, I complained to my husband about not having a mudroom in our house. Seriously, a mudroom, right? Literally a room for mud. When I didn't always have a bedroom growing up, and definitely not one that wasn't shared by one or two other people. If only my 10-year-old self could see me today. I never knew that I could be so proud of being myself, making decisions that I want to make, having the option to turn down a job or career that isn't a good fit for me, having the financial freedom to support my family and not have to rely on government assistance to keep the lights on or food on the table. I never imagined how stable my life could be, but you see, it's others that imagined it for me. They took notice and made the effort to show me how valuable I am and expose me to opportunities that could offer me a better life. And these individuals were just everyday people. They didn't feel bad for me or make me feel that it was the worst thing that our family was on government assistance. They didn't think that they were helpless. They took notice and took the time. They made the time to understand my experience in order to maximize my potential. So, can I be anything I want to be? Yes, I can. And you can be part of that difference. Thank you.
So I hope that you can see that by viewing this TED Talk, it takes a whole group working together, and that is the idea of these town hall meetings. It's to take a look at housing insecurities and housing issues, but it is so much more too. And so that's why we're covering Bridges Out of Poverty tonight. It has to do with many levels of different types of resources and needs out there in the community. And so Emily's going to start us off with what Bridges Out of Poverty is about.
So when we look at this, Bridge Out of Poverty is a uniquely powerful tool designed for social, health, government, and legal service professionals, but it's even bigger than that. It's also for the individuals experiencing poverty, looking to make transitions in their life. Joe runs some really awesome classes around this through St. Vincent de Paul, so if that's something that you're interested in, he'd be a great contact for that. But really what we're looking at is the belief that environments shape available resources, which leads to patterns of thinking and behavior. So it's bigger than just looking at someone is doing without resources or resources financially. It's more of a global aspect to that. What we're looking with Bridges of Poverty is a common language. So, I'm a licensed therapist, so I think about the fact that we diagnose people all the time with mental health concerns. And all a mental health diagnosis is a series of symptoms that are labeled a certain way. So when we look at this, we're really looking at commonly describing things in the common language so we can understand what those symptoms are. So we're really looking to put that on there. It's a blame-free approach. Bridges Out of Poverty really doesn't look to blame anybody, and it uses social cognitive models. So when you think about social cognitive models, you're looking at what is the society, what are the social components, but let's think about them. So cognitively, let's put that all together. So when we look at this, we're moving to the next slide. We're looking at using lenses of economic class to view individuals, institutions, community, and policy experiences where poverty intersects with social disparities. So when we look at that, we're really looking at Ruby Payne, who does the research for Bridges Out of Poverty, talks about the class of poverty, the class of middle class, and the class of wealth. There isn't a formal class system in the United States, but there really is a class system. We do have people who fall under the concepts around poverty, around middle class and wealth. And when we look at those, there's a lot of different components that are built into that. So it's really, when we talk about Bridges Out of Poverty, it's relationships of mutual respect. So we're not blaming anyone. We're working as a team to make changes in people's lives and to make changes in their own lives. When we just listened to the lady speak in the TED Talk, she talked about self-determination as a reality. When she was in poverty and growing up, she didn't feel like she had any sense of self-determination. And as she got older and all of the people connected to her and all the opportunities came forward for her, she saw that sense of self-determination, that she could make a difference in her own life as she moved forward. So when we look at that, that's one of the pieces that is in Bridges. It's a belief that people of all classes, sectors, and political persuasions are problem solvers. So we're looking at the individuals as the lead in their own lives, the ability to make changes and make decisions and influence those decisions in their own lives. So one of the questions that frequently comes up when we talk about individuals who are homeless is, don't they all want to be housed? Don't they all just want to be in like a middle class, stable house? And ultimately the answer is no, we don't decide for those individuals, and there's a lot of reasons, and we've bandied around those, what some of those reasons are, but ultimately it is that concept of self-determination, and it's the idea that people are solving their own problems. There are a lot of ways that people solve problems for homelessness and housing in our community. We're looking at building mental models of poverty, middle class, and wealth. We're viewing this from the world from our own lens. So everybody views the world in their own way and sees things from their own perspective. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. But I just want you to understand that everybody kind of views things from their own individual lens as we move through this. And you're going to be viewing everything we talk about tonight from your own lens as well. Moving on to the next section here. Works to stabilize environment, remove barriers to transition, and build resources. I think that really says exactly what we're working to do here. We're really looking to stabilize individuals' environment, removing barriers to transition. So what's stopping people from changing things in their life? What's in their way? And we're gonna look at what those are and help break those down so that people can make the changes they want. Building resources helps that in a lot of ways as well. Addressing all causes of poverty, the four ones that are included in Ruby Payne are individual behaviors, which I think predominantly people subscribe as the main reason for poverty, community conditions, exploitation, political and economic structures. So there are many factors that influence why someone's socioeconomic status. It's not just because they worked hard and did well. It's not just because they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. There's a lot of different factors that are involved in this, and we will talk about some of those as we move forward tonight. We're looking at building long-term support for individuals, institutional and community policy transitions. No significant change can occur without a significant relationship. That's one of the things when I originally was trained in Ruby Payne's Bridges Out of Poverty, which was about 20 years ago. That was a while ago. Really, that was one of the main things that the training talked about with us, is that, and honestly, as a therapist, that's one of the things we talk about too. It's really the relationship you build with other people that makes change. You know, it influences change. And if you don't have a significant relationship, no trust is going to form and no change is going to happen. Where we're going to work to build economically sustainable communities, it's bigger than the individual. We're looking at a community approach and how can we support the community in changing some of these aspects and perspectives.
So the next slide is pretty busy. It's a busy slide, but it's because it has to do with those connections. It's called Bridges Out of Poverty. It's talking about how things are interconnected. And really, I hope that you got out of the TED Talk how even the bus driver made a difference in the Reese's life. And so each one of these sectors that there's around the circle, there are early childhood, K-12, and all sorts of education, nonprofits, healthcare, the government, even banks and lenders. It all has a means to talk about building the resources of the individual that are there. And those resources that we'll get into in a bit, Emily's going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, are down on the bottom of this slide. Most people think of finance. You know, oh, people in poverty, they don't have the money. And that is true. There's some truth to that. But there's also a lot of other reasons that are resources that may be short for the individual that is struggling for housing, struggling for any type of need in the community. So when Bridges looks at their approach, they look at it from the individual, and that's what a lot of people look at poverty as. But think about it for just a second. If you're short on resources in an institution, you might be poverty-stricken in that institution, or the community. Think about a blighted community. And a blighted community is short of resources. And so it's all about the resources. It's about understanding, not just for the individual, but working together as a whole community, and a community can be in poverty also. And Emily also touched on those four causes of poverty, and most people, again, think of individual behaviors. But poverty and people that are struggling can be struggling because of community conditions. There's a lot of exploitation that goes on, and also just the political structures and the political policies that go along with that. So definitely that slide has a lot to do with what Bridges is, and we're trying to give you the high view of Bridges right now. It's actually training that takes place over multiple days. The next slide has to do with the Getting Ahead in the Just Getting By World is a book that's written by Phil Duvall that takes the Bridges concepts and tries to use those with individuals to understand poverty and to put change in their life. Getting Ahead comes in many flavors. There's the one that you see on the screen right now, but there's Getting Ahead in the workplace. There's Getting Ahead while getting out, which is people that are in leaving incarceration and would need some assistance in that area. So the idea behind getting ahead is these building blocks that are on this slide. And so that when you hear what's called the tyranny of the moment, people who are trapped in the tyranny of the moment think in terms, and I like to always think of, a tunnel vision type thing that's there. I have to look up at the camera in order to do that. But the tyranny of the moment, you can't focus on the outside. You can only focus on what's going on. So my car is broken down, my rent needs to be paid, and so forth. That's the tyranny of the moment. And so Bridges and Getting Ahead tries to help people to think in terms of abstract thinking, to be able to let some of that go so that then they can do some planning, do some changing. It's about thinking about their lives and how they can make a difference in that struggle that they're going through. They are the problem solvers. So Getting Ahead is people that are sitting around the table and they're discussing their lives and coming up with information and ideas and plans for their future. So we mentioned those resources, and Emily's going to speak about those resources on the next slide.
And actually, I'm going to step back for a second and talk about the 4 causes of poverty and how that really relates to what brings us here for the town halls. When we talk about the individual behaviors, so things that are going on at the individual level, the experiences people are having, whether it be eviction or, things that may have caused that or a history of whatever. But when we talk about community conditions, we have a very small vacancy rate in Sheboygan for housing right now. There aren't a lot of options for apartments out there. I was just helping a young man look at apartments today. We found 2 apartments under $800 a month for a 2-bedroom in Sheboygan County. And not to age myself too far, but when I was an 18-year-old or 21-year-old, my rent was $400 a month for a 3-bedroom. And I would like to say it wasn't that long ago, but it probably was. But even a couple of years ago, I was assisting people getting in apartments, and $400, $450 a month for a 2-bedroom wasn't unheard of in Sheboygan. But right now, you're not going to find a 2-bedroom for much under $700. And we'll talk more about why that's a barrier for many people as we move forward here. But I just want to understand that that's a community condition. That's not because someone's not working hard enough or an individual issue. That's a community-related concern. Exploitation, we'll talk about some pieces of that as we move forward too. But there's lots of different ways that individuals we work with are exploited. For a while, there was a boom for day labor, essentially, or temporary employment where you couldn't get insurance or time off. That's a form of exploitation. The political and economic structures is a whole nother look at the system. So we've had discussions about that too, but I just wanted to kind of address really that when we talk about community conditions, it really relates to some of the factors we have around housing at this point and affordable housing in our community and just the lack of housing. So the options are slim. But as we move to the essential resources, back to where I was supposed to be here, like I said, financial is that first one that people think of. People in poverty are poor. They don't have money. But there are a lot of other resources that are all attuned to this. When you think about, I always think of the movie The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith. And he went from homeless with his son to being a CEO, millionaire, billionaire guy. But when you look at that, he had other resources. He didn't have the money, but he had an emotional IQ, he had emotional intelligence, he had emotional regulation, he spoke the same language as the people that are in power. So imagine not being able to speak the language that all of the service providers and all the community resources in your community had. He had the mental and the cognitive. He had a super high IQ. In the one scene, he's manipulating a Rubik's Cube and he gets it done in their drive, And imagine, I think they were in New York and the drive was probably longer than in the movie, but ultimately, when you look at that, having that cognitive ability and the intellectual capability to succeed, not everybody has that. There's social capital, connections to other people. I'm going to be honest with you right now. I can't go anywhere in Sheboygan without running into someone that I know or I'm connected to, but not everybody has those level of connections, and not everybody knows how to build those levels of connections. Physical. So when we talk about mobility or the ability to get around or the ability to get in and out of buildings, because not everyone there's ADA accessible, being able to physically handle an entire day. COVID has run rampant, and one of the biggest complaints I've had from people I know in my life is fatigue. Trying to get through an entire workday after having had COVID is very difficult for people. It's that physically they're not able to sustain the way they were before. Spiritual, it's basically just having that belief system that someone else has your back and you are not alone in the world can really build as a resource. And some people don't have that or have that connection, or they haven't found the spiritual group that matches their belief system or supports them in the way they need to. We talk about motivation and persistence. I think that's number 2 for the reason why people generally think people are in poverty. Number 1, they don't have the money. Number 2, they don't have the motivation and persistence, which is often spoken about as more of laziness. And that's not laziness. There's all these other factors involved in this. It's not necessarily that someone doesn't want to succeed. They may not understand the motivation. They may not understand that being persistent can make a difference. But there also is that, we talked about, the TED Talk really discussed that concept around, I didn't even know that was an option. I didn't even know that there was a possibility I could go to college, not me. She talked about that. That's back to those concepts of self-determination, not understanding that you even have options or that there are not being informed to make choices. How do you get motivated? How do you stay persistent on something that you aren't even aware is an option for you? Integrity and trust. This is huge. It's that those ideas around attachment. So many people that I've worked with have very poor attachment, which leads to the inability to form trusting relationships. And integrity is that concept of, do you do what you say you're going to do? And if you're working with people who don't have integrity, you're not going to be able to build those trusting relationships. And what did I say? Without significant relationships, significant change cannot occur. So when we look at that, if you don't trust somebody, you're not going to have a significant relationship. In addition to that, we're looking at role models. So people who did overcome, people who did change. When we talk again about our TED Talk, and we look at that, she is one of those role models at this point. She came from a situation and she made changes in her life, and she is that person who can show other people that they can succeed and change things for themselves as well. That there are options, that there is a possibility. In addition to that, there's the knowledge of the hidden rules, and basically. The people who have succeeded really understand the hidden rules of social class. And we will talk about that more as we move through.
On the next slide.
Yeah, we're going to roll right into that. It'll be great. So we're talking about the hidden rules of class. Again, this is a pretty chaotic slide, but life can be pretty chaotic sometimes. So what is a hidden rule? It's an unspoken habit or cue of a group. So we just talk about groups as social classes. So poverty, middle class, and wealth are all considered groups, and they all have unspoken habits and cues, things that they do, things that are maybe stereotypes of a certain group of people. So when we look at that, one of them would be, let's look at time. So people in poverty have more of a flexible view on time. I'll get there. When I get there, something else might need to come up that's more important, but I'm still going to show up for that. Whereas the middle class is more of a very rigid, this is what the appointment time was, this is when school starts, this is when your doctor's appointment was. The social sector runs on the middle class rules and the hidden rules in the middle class. So you have to understand that people are expecting you to show up on time for work, and understand and then realize that you need to adhere to that rule to get your needs met. So if you don't know, because it's a hidden rule, how are you going to adhere to that? When we talk about the culture of wealth and the class of wealth, we're looking at more of, well, of course I'm going to college, or when we talk about education, or time is money. What if that expression? I've never lived that point where time is money, but we also talk about education. We talked about the unattainable nature when people in poverty don't necessarily see continuing education as even an option for them. So we're talking about tech school, we're talking about 4-year education, a master's degree. They don't necessarily see that even as a possibility for them. That's for other people. Where the middle class, you really grow up with this idea of first you go to elementary school, then you go to middle school, then you go to high school, then you go to college, and then you live your life and you buy a house and you buy a car and you have a picket fence and 2.5 kids. It's that concept of this is how you succeed, is by achieving these pieces, and they ingrain that in the children of middle class households from the beginning from birth on. For wealth, I often think about, not to be controversial, about we just had that all that stuff happened in California a couple of years ago where people were buying their kids' way into college. and that they got caught, and kind of what happens when you try and buy your ways into college and you get caught for that. But how many years was that just the norm? Like, wealthy families can buy a wing to a college and their kids are, you know, their legacies, they're gonna end up there. It's just expected that you're gonna follow in your footsteps and of your parents, and you're gonna get the degrees that they got and go to the schools that they went to. It's just kind of this, well, of course that's going to happen. So when we look at that, there's hidden rules to all these different pieces. When you look, these are just some examples, but look at all the different pieces that are up there. And all of those have hidden rules. Depending on which class we're talking about, the rules are different. So if you'd like to learn more of that, you can take Joe's class. I'm sure he'll talk more about that too. But but he's going to talk about the driving forces, which is a really big jump right off of hidden rules.
Yeah, actually, by looking at the hidden rules, you get an idea that there are certain factors or certain things that and these aren't hard and fast, by the way, these what's called driving forces, because they overlap. So on this slide, it says the class of poverty, and we need it so that we have some way of speaking here. Survival. Just think about that for just a moment. People in poverty and how important that is to make it for that day, or make it for that hour that's there. So you can see that that has to be a driving force, because that is what is going to move them and make them get through the day. Relationship is very important in a driving force in poverty. But again, it can be in middle class too. So there's overlapping here. Be careful not to just say, oh, it's all about that, it's all about that, because it isn't. Relationship is just as important in middle class a lot of times, but when you have to rely on others for your survival, that's their, poverty puts a high value, a high driving force on relationship. And then entertainment. If you're, for instance, you're always, fighting, by trying to survive, not fighting, but trying to make it day to day, entertainment becomes an important part, because I have to move myself away from that difficulty that we're having. So, the relationship between the hidden rules of class, and when you start thinking about them and you've been in situations where you felt a little bit like, oh, well, I don't fit in with this group, then you're recognizing that there's a hidden rule of class, and they go right along with these driving forces. We've just mentioned, certainly middle class is all about achievement, moving forward, staying up with the Joneses and so forth. That's there. Again, not hard and fast. It can be in different classes that are here. And then finally, of course, wealth. When you think of wealth, you think of political power, you think of financial and so forth, and that can fit into middle class also, but certainly those are the things that are driving that group of individuals along the way. That's there. So there's a connection between the concepts of resources, hidden rules, and driving forces. And these are what dictate somewhat of the mental models of how we think about where we're at. And it's a lot of times how you grew up. So if you are in the poverty class, it could be situational or it could be generational. Situational would be you're thrown into that, and you may have some of those driving forces of the middle class, but you're in the poverty class. Again, not to point and say anyone's in a particular class, because no one likes to get locked into that type of thing. Generational, however, is much more difficult to break out of, to move into another class, because it's over a number of different generations. Individuals start to have those driving forces become part of them. And so it's important to know if it's situational or generational. And That's not to lock anybody into any particular place in life. Certainly, the TED Talk spoke of that. It spoke of, I know both poverty and I also know middle class to move forward. So, in getting ahead, we do a lot of what's called mental models. And Emily's going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide, but we do that so that we can start to, the people around the table can start to understand various mental models of both poverty, middle class, and wealth, so that they can make changes in their life and make ideas about plans, future story plans. And I'll get into that a little later.
So when we look at that, the definition of a mental model, which Joe keeps bringing up here, is personal, internal representation of external reality that people use to interact with the world. So basically, it's that lens I talked about at the beginning. It's your personal lens that you're viewing the world at. And basically, that's influenced by your life experience, your perceptions of the world, and an understanding of the world as a whole. So how do you see the world? What kind of glasses do you put on to look at the world? Joe was doing that telescopy thing, and like do that into the camera. But when you look at that, that's the way that you're viewing the world. That's the way that you see things. That doesn't mean it's the reality for everybody. It's not the way that everybody views the world. But what it does is it forms these mental models. It's knowing basically what your belief system looks like. This is the way the world treats me. This is the way I interact with the world. And this is the way the world is in my perception. So when we look at that, just as a generalization, like I said, we're looking at that common language. We're looking at the mental model of poverty around the idea of relationships. So that stems around children, entertainment, agency time. Agency time is something you're probably not going to find in any of the other classes. It's what agency time is time that you spend getting on a bus or driving to a place, standing in line, waiting for someone else's, the appointment to show up, and being there, telling them your life story in order to get the assistance and resources you need so that you can move to the next appointment, the next thing that you need to do, the next job that you perhaps have, or picking your kids up from school, and getting all those things done is agency time. So when you look at people who are without the resources and are in poverty, they spend a lot of time trying to seek help to get by and survive. So transportation, the bus system is not actually meant for individuals in poverty. When you look at the fact that if someone who has to rely on public transportation, and let's say they have two children, one's in daycare, one's in school, they get on the bus, they take one to daycare, they have to get off the bus, drop the kid off at daycare, wait for another bus, get on the bus, take the next one to school, get back on the bus again, wait for it again, and get to their place. Can you imagine how long that actually takes in waiting for the bus and getting off and on, and how much money that costs to get on and off the bus? It's actually very expensive to utilize that system as your main source of transportation. It's also very expensive to own a car. So we're talking about auto maintenance, we're purchasing the vehicle to begin with, we're talking about exploitation, so we're talking about loans that people can't afford, interest rates people can't afford, the day-to-day maintenance, gas for the vehicle, heat so your tank doesn't freeze in the wintertime. There's all sorts of pieces to this that are looking at that. Transportation may be across the board on here, but it's different depending on which mental model you're living with. Understanding that mental model for people in poverty, transportation could be a big concern. When we talk about safety, chemical dependency, mental health, housing, all of these are pieces of the mental model, and they're built strongly around the idea of relationships. We continue to talk about the mental model for middle class and the ideas around achievement. So when we look at those pieces, vacations, careers, retirement, I often say I'm going to die in office. I hope that doesn't really happen because I'm working from home right now, so that would be really, really uncomfortable for everyone in my family. But, when we look at this, like that middle class concept is where that idea of retirement comes into play, is the idea that I'm going to save, I'm going to get a 401k or a 401(b), and I'm going to have money set aside for when I'm not working anymore. When we look at the conversations around the idea of the mental models of poverty, they're not looking that far into the future. That's that tyranny of the moment that Joe was talking about. It's living that day to day, not thinking about what's going to happen to me when I get older and how I'm going to take care of myself. You know, when we talk about the mental model for wealth, you know, then we're talking about probably IRAs and annuities and things I know absolutely nothing about. But, you know, there's also those concepts around charitable activities and things like that. I had to learn about what the Junior League was when I started to learn about Bridges Out of Poverty. I was like, is that a bowling league for kids? It is not. It is a charitable organization. We have the Women's Service League in Sheboygan County, which is fantastic. They do such great work. They're women that come together to make a difference in our community's lives. Super active during the COVID response, and they did fantastic things. But they're a charitable group of women in our community, which is probably very much like the Junior League. But when we look at that, there's all these pieces here that some of these things you might find are on more than one. We're looking at vacations and that middle class model, that concept around, you know, we're going to take a weekend getaway or maybe 1 week in the vacation during the summer, we're going to hit an Airbnb on the lake. Whereas vacations for the wealthy class, probably a summer home. Maybe if you're really doing well, you get a yacht. I don't know, that might be fun. So when we look at that, the concepts around vacation are very different. You know, I think that when we look at in the judgment that people have around the use of entertainment and that mental model for poverty, as you notice, vacation's not on that circle, but entertainment is. So maybe we're not going to go on vacation somewhere, but we're going to rent movies, or we're going to go to see a movie, or we're going to go see a sporting event, or we're going to go see a music concert, and we're going to use those as our time away to kind of get that entertainment, which is a form of vacation. So when we look at this, it's really like looking at viewing your life and your circumstances through these lenses, which impacts the way that you interact with the world and the way that you handle yourself moving forward. You know, Joe talked about that concept around change. He was real clear that we're not looking to pigeonhole anyone or make anyone feel like they're, well, oh, I'm in poverty, therefore. You know, there's always that opportunity to change. There's always that concept around self-determination and making changes in your life. So we don't want to say that anyone has to be stuck in any of this. We're not blaming anyone for these situations. But we also want to talk about that ability to make the change and understand that as a community we can make changes to make lives easier for people experiencing poverty in our community, which is part of what we do with Bridges.
So actually, the next slide goes along with that change that Emily was just talking about. I hope that you see that on the slide with the mental model that was just before this one, that by understanding each of those different mental models of different classes, you have a better, fuller understanding of the people around you, and you make better decisions overall. So that's the value of mental models. And in the Getting Ahead, which is an 18 to 20 week session, and that's what this slide is about, is we look at those mental models, we draw those mental models, we talk about our life now. You can see that in the gold triangle. It's what's my life now about, and what are the causes of poverty? We talk about that. Understanding poverty and understanding where I'm at this time. We get into what's language. I'm in the blue triangle now. During Module 5, we get into talking about language, because how we get along and talk with one another makes a big difference, and not everybody talks the same. And I'm not talking about English and French. I'm talking about just communicating. That's there. So we talk about that also. We take a self-assessment at the beginning, and we take another assessment of resources as we move on. And if you follow up the outside of this triangle, it begins with co-investigation. Everybody around the table is co-investigators. We all have ideas, and we're going to all put into those ideas. And so we start to build and understand poverty and we grow in our power. We grow in our change. We talk about change and the theory of change and what it takes to change on there and how to build resources. And like I said, we take a self-assessment. We look at responsibility, and then we come up with what's called a future story. It's a plan of action that each individual has, and they've developed it around the table with the other individuals because they are the problem solvers. Everybody around that table is the problem solver. It's not somebody trying to tell another person how to change their life. The individuals who are taking that, and they're called investigators because of that. They come up with their own plan. And so that's really what Getting Ahead is about, and it's built upon the Bridges model for, again, getting ahead can be getting ahead in the just getting by world, but it can be getting ahead in the workplace, because there's individuals out in the workaday world. There's getting ahead while getting out. There's medical getting ahead, and there's educational getting ahead information that's there. So it's that whole Bridges concept of bringing it all together. So I hope that the final slide here has to do with taking these concepts in the value that we're giving them to you in relationship to how housing is much more complex than putting up a building or that type of thing. There are so many parts to housing that and the struggles within a community that we, by better knowing those struggles and coming to the table, and that's the whole idea of the town hall, and I hope that you get involved when you're listening to this, that you get involved and you say, yes, I could make a difference. So the final slide says, as we travel through these town hall meetings, please try to keep in your mind what are some of those housing struggles for individuals in the Sheboygan community. And so you're going to hear over the next period of time, yet today and the next, every 2 weeks, we're going to have another topic, as we had mentioned at the beginning. So any other comments, Emily?
So I think that you summed that up really nicely. The beginning, like I said, this session really is understanding the ideas around why do we have housing insecurities? What are the pieces of this? I think, Joe, when you talked about the getting ahead, which was really nice, is that's more of affecting some more of the individual causes of poverty. It doesn't necessarily fix some of the system issues or the community-based issues or the political issues, but it really helps to address that individual level, and I think that's really important. And we're here today to talk about more of the systems level and the community-based level. So there are many different aspects of this. So I'm really glad that we're touching on more than one area of cause of poverty today. That brings us to the end of the Bridges section. We're going to turn it over very swiftly, because I know that time is of the essence here, swiftly over to another Emily, as if you hadn't had enough Emilys today. You get more Emilys from United Way, who's going to talk about A.L.I.C.E, which is not Stranger with a Gun training, and she'll tell you exactly what it is.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, kind of transitioning from poverty, talking about A.L.I.C.E. I'm going to talk to you, I'll let you know exactly what A.L.I.C.E. is, and then I'll talk more about the cost of living, workforce trends, and then most importantly, housing trends and how that affects the A.L.I.C.E. population. I just want to let you know, starting out, that the A.L.I.C.E. report was put out in 2018, or it was pulled in 2018. So all of the data is from then. So not as current as we would hope to have, but it does still give a snapshot of the issues that A.L.I.C.E. population sees in our community. What the report doesn't do is point out specific solutions to the issues raised, but instead tries to illuminate the daily financial struggles many of us face. And so that goes back to a lot of the things that Emily and Joe were saying. On our next slide, I'm going to just go into talking about exactly what A.L.I.C.E. is. So A.L.I.C.E. stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So who is A.L.I.C.E. in our community? Simply put, A.L.I.C.E. families and individuals are working hard and falling short. They're people we know, our hardworking neighbors, friends, family, coworkers, and so on and so forth. These families and individuals have jobs, but many do not qualify for social services or support.
This conference will now be recorded.
ALICE individuals also hold jobs that are critical to the success of our communities. They help Sheboygan County continue moving forward. There are childcare workers, laborers, home health aides, truck drivers, store clerks, repair workers, office assistants. But these individuals often aren't sure how they may be putting dinner on the table the next evening, or how they're going to pay for an unexpected car repair. The entire community is impacted by the challenges that ALICE individuals and families face. And if we can help to improve the quality of living for ALICE families, we know that the entire community will benefit from that. So, simply put, ALICE represents households with incomes above the federal poverty level, but below the basic cost of living. And most individuals have been ALICE at one point, and the struggle for many is often different than the struggle that many others have. So I know that when my husband and I first got married, we were definitely in ALICE, and we've been blessed enough to, I would say, transition out of ALICE in the last couple of years. But we may have had many opportunities that others may not, or have not faced challenges that some others had. So keeping that into consideration, that everyone does have different opportunities and different challenges kind of going through. On this slide, we're going to break down exactly how many households fall into, or fall below the ALICE threshold in Sheboygan County. So you'll see that 7% of individuals, again, this is in 2018, were considered in poverty in Sheboygan County, and 26% are ALICE. So putting those numbers together, that accounts to 1/3 of Sheboygan County being below the ALICE threshold. So again, when we're talking about this being our neighbors, our family, our friends, it's 1 in 3 people in our community. So it's quite a large number of individuals. On the next slide, we do have just another breakdown of this trend, showing that it's been pretty stable, that 1/3 of individuals in our community being below the ALICE threshold since 2010. You can see there was an uptick in our numbers of poverty around 2012, as some of those ALICE individuals fell down into that demographic, but then it's kind of flipped a little bit in the last couple of years. As we're talking about this, I do want to mention how the workforce plays into it. Sorry, I lost my notes. Okay, so looking at this 2018 numbers, we saw increase in worker vulnerability as the number of individuals who were working part-time hit a record high. It was at 60% of individuals that were working part-time or were paid by the hour. And the reason why this is concerning is because that accounts for a fluctuation in different hours that they may be working, different schedules. Often individuals who are working part-time or being paid by the hour don't receive as many benefits as those that are salaried. And this in turn makes it harder for those individuals to budget and to plan, and does increase ALICE households. Another interesting number in 2018 was that 21% of seniors were still in the labor force. This is an unusually high percentage compared to other states. So those that were 65 and under and were not working for whatever reason, this is not accounting for those that are in our unemployment numbers. This is the individuals that are out of the workforce. Most of them were students. They were either in college or just finishing up high school. The other large portion, about 21%, were out of the workforce because of health issues, an illness or a disability that made it difficult for them to work. And the remainder of adults that weren't in the workforce were for a number of other reasons, including caregiving responsibilities, conflicts, or lack of access to transportation or childcare. On the next slide you had up, it's just got a glance of the households and different types of them. We've had a shift in the demographics over the last number of years where now we have the highest number of individuals who are never been married. So we have more people who are cohabitating, more adult children who are still living at home. We have parents who are moving back into their children's households. And although that is becoming more common, we are seeing amongst all of the different demographics that ALICE is still a large chunk of their populations. It's affecting every single kind of person and every single type of living situation. And looking at that slide, I just want to point out our largest number of demographics are those seniors. As I had mentioned, many of them are still working, even though they're 65 or older, and they account for the largest age demographic of our ALICE individuals. And this accounts for, I'll jump into the next slide because I just want to touch on what the survival budget is to let you know the difference in seniors. So how ALICE is determined, obviously we're saying that it's individuals who can't make ends meet but are above the federal poverty level, but what does that really look like? So we break that down with the survival budget. The survival budget looks at these main areas: housing, food, transportation, healthcare, childcare, and technology, and then puts in a small budget for miscellaneous and taxes. It looks at those things and says, how much is this going to cost for this family or this group of individuals, whatever that household looks like, whether it be a senior or a family of four, for example. And it does break it down differently for each age demographic. For a senior, they are going to take into account that they may spend less because they get certain Medicare or certain benefits that way, but they're also going to account for the fact that their health care could be more expensive due to increased chance of chronic diseases. And so taking that into consideration, the actual cost of household basics is well above the federal poverty level. So that's where these ALICE individuals come in, is the fact that they cannot afford all the things that they need, but they're not qualifying for the federal subsidies that would be able to support them to get the things that they need. And this is in part because of federal poverty level is determined by inflation. And inflation takes into account the costs of all goods and how they increase. And the survival budget, breaking it down this way, there is a higher increase in the costs of the essentials that people need than there is in some of those other goods that people are purchasing. And housing is the biggest part of that. Housing is by far the largest cost increase that's been seen over the last number of years with the ALICE survival budget. The next slide is just going to be a breakdown so people can see kind of what that survival budget looks like for different types of individuals. So again, showing that survival budget for a single adult compared to a senior who may be a little bit more because you can see that they need to budget more for healthcare versus a household of four where 2 children are in childcare. And just to give an actual number, you can kind of see it on here. For a single adult, the federal poverty level in 2018 was just over $12,000, but their survival budget for that same single adult was over $21,000. So there is quite a gap in those numbers. Moving on to the next slide with our cost of living trends. There are a few different trends that we're seeing that are having a large impact on these ALICE families. Transportation is a huge one, and commute time has been increasing for many people throughout the last number of years. The cost of childcare increasing, as well as the childcare options decreasing. Right now, it is the first time ever that it is more expensive to send an infant to a childcare for a year than it is to send your child to a 4-year state college. Food insecurity, which has been a long-standing problem for families and children, is also increasing among young adults and seniors. College students are facing greater challenges to meet a living wage and meet their living expenses, even though an increasing number of students are working either part-time or full-time. There's gaps in health based on demographic, environmental, and socioeconomic factors, and they're continuing to grow. And natural and man-made disasters will continue to impact ALICE households at a disproportionate rate. And that's what I think is going to be the most interesting thing to see about the next ALICE report that's going to come out, is how COVID has really impacted these ALICE families. And now moving in specifically into housing trends on our next slide. Like I said before, the main cost of ALICE essentials, or that kind of survival budget for them, is growing because of housing. In the last decade, housing construction has not kept up with the population growth here in Wisconsin. Construction costs rose faster than incomes and inflation. And as a result, housing costs increased for both renters and owners. And home ownership rates declined, especially among young adults, first-time homebuyers, and Black and Hispanic families. Millennials and seniors are also driving demand for low-cost homes and rental units, which then in turn increases the demand and increases those prices. These trends are likely going to continue as affordable housing becomes harder to find. And this is compounded by the availability of affordable housing decreasing, as these units are more vulnerable to either needing to be redeveloped or a disaster. Households that are severely rent burdened, which means they have more than 50% or more of their income is going to their rent, are projected to grow by at least 11% nationwide, which accounts to more than 13 million people. Again, that's nationwide, that are going to be paying at least 50% or more of their income to their rent or their mortgage. Additionally, households with lower incomes are more likely to be that severely rent or housing burdened than those with higher incomes. Looking on our next slide, the impacts of housing on individuals and families is much larger than I think people often realize. The main housing components that impact quality of life are stability, quality and safety, affordability, and neighborhood. And the ripples of the impact of a neighborhood are larger than we often think, because it's going to impact the future of those families and especially those children. Typically, if you're in a lower income neighborhood, you're going to have a lower quality of schools. You're going to be closer to environmental hazards such as flood zones or pollution, and it's going to be less safe. There's increased property and violent crime are more concentrated in low income neighborhoods. And I think the more interesting thing than that, because that feels a little bit more obvious to me, is that the impact of housing on health. Housing interventions for low-income individuals have been found to improve health outcomes and decrease healthcare costs. And the evidence on and relationships between housing and health is complex, but it's really compelling. There's been seen an increase in depression, substance abuse, And in turn, you increase your risk factors for cardiovascular disease and other serious illnesses. Children are more likely to suffer anxiety and have lower school performance. It increases their chronic health issues as well. And another concern for children is lead. There's an estimated 500,000 children in the United States under the age of 6 that have lead levels that are high enough to affect long-term cognitive and behavioral development. So all of these are just kind of examples of the impacts and the importance of housing when it comes to ALICE individuals. On my next slide, just talking about renting versus buying. Obviously, homeownership remains highly beneficial for most families, offering financial gains as a way to build wealth. Home owning is especially beneficial for those who expect to own their home for a long time so that they can don't have to worry about the volatility of home prices. And it will outperform stocks and bonds year over year. And the average homeowner has a household wealth of about $230,000 compared to the average renter, which is average wealth is about $5,200. The returns on home ownerships are not just financial, though. Home ownership provides a stable place to live and an inflation hedge because mortgage costs are generally fixed, while rents tend to rise with inflation. And although home ownership has these benefits, it may not transfer easily to ALICE families, even if they do decide to own the home, because if they buy, they often don't qualify for as competitive of rates as individuals with more financial backing, forcing them into more risky financial positions. So obviously this is kind of a complex conversation and different aspects to it, but definitely a lot of stats that I just threw at you, so give you some time to digest that. On our last slide that I've got, I just want to share this Making Tough Choices website that you guys can go on if you're interested in kind of seeing what ALICE families go through. But I think that Tracy, who's going to be following me up, has an even more compelling and interesting story for us tonight.
Good evening. As Emily said, my name is Tracy. I've lived in Sheboygan County my entire life. I came from a broken family, really dysfunctional. So at 18, I was on my own, completely on my own. And it was about survival. That's what I had to do. So there was no college. There was nothing like that afterwards. I was able to get my CNA license when I was still in high school. It was a collaboration between my high school and LTC. So I did take advantage of that. I actually had my first child when I was 22, single mom. And at that time then, because I had that child, I did qualify for some programs like food stamps and medical assistance and child care. The food stamps, though, was actually pretty, it wasn't consistent. It really depended on the job that I held, how many hours I was working, and I did try to get a job in a factory just because, people tell you, oh, if you make more money, you're not going to have to utilize this. So I did that. I didn't even last a month because I ended up with pink eye. My son ended up with pink eye. I didn't have the family support. I had to call in sick. I had to call in sick. He couldn't go to daycare. So I was fired because it was in my probationary period. So I actually had also gotten my teacher assistant certificate with a different job before I had my son. So I used that and I got a job in a daycare, which I'll be honest, at that time I made $6.50 an hour, $6.50. But he could come with me. So, and I figured it would be a little bit more flexibility. If my son was sick, it would be a little bit more understanding. I could still have that job. But even with childcare assistance, my co-payment every week was $42. And I remember that specifically because it was almost $100 out of my very small paycheck. So there were times when it was rough. I did have to make some pretty tough choices, even as far as I myself would go without eating so my son could eat. I ended up having my second son when I was 24. He actually ended up having some pretty severe health issues, respiratory-wise, and man, I missed a lot of work. I was in danger of losing my job at that time because of having to miss work. So I had to pull my children out of a center and put them in an in-home daycare, which was cheaper. That wasn't the best choice, though. That's a whole nother story, but they were mistreated there. It was bad. But she kept him if he was sick. He had a lot of fevers. A center would not keep him. The other issue I ran into, having medical assistance, you're really at the mercy of the state and what they deem as appropriate medication, I guess you would say. The doctor finally had, well, I should back up. He was diagnosed with asthma and reactive airway disease, and that reactive airway disease caused a lot of lung infections and pneumonia. He had pneumonia 7 times before he was 2. The last time he almost died. He needed a special type of albuterol called Xopenex, and it worked beautifully for him. Regular albuterol, it made him worse, actually. After a few months on Xopenex, and he seemed to be improving, the state insurance wouldn't cover it anymore. They said, nope, he has to go back on albuterol. That's what we'll cover. And the doctor did what she could, and she fought with them. She sent in the paperwork. She sent in the medical note saying, hey, this is what we're seeing. They didn't care. So at that time, that Xopenex monthly was $180. I did what I could, but there were times that he went without, and he ended up having to go back on just the albuterol at times. And that was rough because then I was back into the trend of having to miss work because he couldn't breathe. How could I leave my son if he couldn't breathe? So luckily, though, by the time he reached school age, he seemed to have grown out of some of that, and it was a little easier. Some people are like, oh, get a second shift job, a third shift job. They pay more, sure, but there wasn't daycare available for second and third shift. There wasn't. And then I would often be hit with, oh, you should go to college. You should take advantage of it. You're a single mom, sure, but when you have a child who was struggling to breathe, and my older son did have some emotional and behavioral issues, not a lot of people wanted to take that on for me to even try to improve anything. Then, taxes came around, and I heard a lot of the, oh, well, you're a single mom, you must get so much back in taxes. Sure. Except that went to either purchasing my next just to get me through vehicle or making the necessary repairs to get me through to the next. That went to getting caught up on utility bills because you play the game. In the winter, they couldn't shut you off. So you didn't pay because, well, look, you could buy a few more groceries then over the winter. So I would play catch up with utility bills and try to pay out a little bit more ahead, or possibly get my children the clothes that they needed, some decent shoes maybe, instead of, having to buy them the Walmart shoes for $15 that would fall apart every 2-3 months. So you had to keep spending that money. Well, maybe now I could get them, that pair of shoes that was going to last them a little bit longer. So it'd be a little bit easier. as they got older, I'd like to say things got easier, but it really didn't. I was still in this trend of just trying to make it work, trying to make everything fit together. Like, okay, they didn't need daycare anymore, but then there were things like sports, and they wanted to do things with friends, and there were things that they didn't get to do because the money wasn't there. It just wasn't there. And I look back, and there were times that I know I had people that took advantage of me, but I needed the money. Like I had this friend who had a disabled mom, and she'd be like, "Hey, I want to go out. Can you put my mom to bed? I'll throw you $50." I needed the $50 because I needed gas in my car. So either my children came along with me and they were up until who knows when, or as they got a little bit older, technically they could stay home alone. Was it the best? No, because my kids were putting themselves to bed at, 10 and 12. Mom wasn't there because I needed that money to make it through, to pay that rent. I'm now married. I've been married for 6 years, but, we still, even with the double income share, we can pay our bills now, but man, if something happens, we lose it all. My older son is off on his own, taking care of his own stuff. My younger son is in college, trying to make a go of it. And he said to me just a couple weeks ago, we were talking about this when he was home. And he was talking about how there were some weeks that he just ate ramen. I'm like, oh my God, why don't you call me? Why don't you call me? I'll send you money. I'll do what I can. He's like, because Mom, he's like, I remember there were times you didn't eat, so we could eat. I didn't realize that he saw that. I didn't realize that. So now my own son doesn't want to come to me when he doesn't have enough because he wants to make sure that I have enough now. That kills you as a parent to hear that. So this is where we are now, and I'm hoping that, my children will try to break this trend that is happening, but something's got to change. And I don't know what the answer is. So that's where I am, and that's where I was.
Oh, I'm ready. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to all the presenters tonight. You all did amazing, and thank you so much to Tracy opening up about some of, the hardest things in your life is not easy. So it's really appreciated. Thank you to the city of Sheboygan for letting us use this space tonight, helping us with all of the technological pieces, everything. It's awesome. But we would also like to open this up for comments or questions at this point. So also, thank you all for attending and registering. It shows a lot about how much you care about your community. So should we just let people kind of unmute themselves? Yeah. Okay, so if there is a specific somebody who has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask.
It's like a housing coalition meeting, just
Yeah.
like dead air. We need some questions. The town hall, you guys got things to say, we know it.
And I will mention, I think Emily had mentioned this earlier too, is that there were a lot of questions during the registration. Some of them pertain to future town halls that we're gonna have. And some of them, we don't really have specifically like a town hall scheduled for it now, but we do have a panel for our fourth, series in this session, so the fourth presentation. And we were thinking that we would build our panel kind of around some of those unanswered questions that we already had. So some of those questions, or most of those questions, should be addressed in future Housing Coalition meetings. Or in the town hall, sorry about that. Yeah. No, I don't see any questions or comments in the chat. So, but if anybody has questions specific to, A.L.I.C.E. or Bridges Out of Poverty, or even for Tracy, we would take those.
So I just want to be really clear that the panel that Abby was talking about is on March 3rd. We decided to avoid having these all run as a series as you register one. And then what we find is that people don't show up for all of them when they register for all of them. So we would like to make sure that people sign up individually. So you will see, wherever you found this before, you will find it again. I know the city of Sheboygan has posted it on their Facebook page. We had it up on the Housing Coalition Facebook page. It was up on What's Happening in Sheboygan. I know a lot of people had shared it individually as well, so expect more of those. Our goal originally was to do this more of a hybrid model so that people could come here face to face and in person. And I'm gonna tell you right now, and I think everyone here feels this, is that sometimes it's easier to see someone's face and their reaction, so we know if we're on track with what we're talking about. So it really just kind of feels like we're all talking to Chad right now. So he's been a great audience. Thanks, Chad. So our audience of one. So, you know, we'd love to open this back up to a hybrid model in the future if the pandemic settles down and the spread settles down a little bit. We just really are looking at community safety, and the fact that it might be nicer to sit on your couch and listen to us talk than it is to sit in one of these chairs, and stay socially distant from your neighbors. So the next session, like I said, is February 3rd, then we're looking at February 17th, and then March 3rd. March 3rd is the panel discussion. We really, really would like questions. I know some of the names that are on here when we look at this, so if you have any questions for this group, we would love to hear them.
So M. Quinn, hold on one second, has just a comment, says, thank you for the informative overview on this serious challenge. I really appreciate the personal story from the last speaker. Thank you.
We all appreciate that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very much so.
I think we're all over here in tears.
Yeah. They were like, everybody looked at me and I was like, what? Tracy Burnett says, yes, thanks so much. Very informative. I look forward to future sessions. Jennifer Rutten says, thank you everyone for addressing this important issue here in our community. Thank you to the speakers and to the last speaker for sharing her story. Very brave, and I hope will spark everyone to get together and help. And then Krista Cheney also says, thank you. I am curious if we may be able to pick up or receive an email with the slides. I was watching on my phone and they were very difficult to see, but seem very important. Do you think that's something we could get out?
We certainly can talk about that moving, you know, I think it's an internal discussion, and we can see if that's something that we can send out in the email.
Yeah.
Chad's offering to post them on the city website.
Yeah.
Ooh. So also, just so you're aware, I know that on our list here, we also have a link to the TED Talk. So if that's something that you wanted to view again, or maybe show people who are close to you, it's https : and then the word tiny URL, which I thought Joe was kidding about when he said it the other day.
No,
It's
that's fun.
tinyurl.com/TEDxFondy, FONDY, all mushed together. So I think we can definitely add that when we send things out moving forward as well. In addition to that, we'll talk a little bit about the Housing Coalition. Like I said, it's been around a really long time. We're in the process of doing some kind of, I want to say, upgrades. We've been strategic planning, so looking at how we can be more of an action-oriented coalition, to look for facilitating. We educate, advocate, and facilitate change are the things that we're really looking to do through the Housing Coalition in Sheboygan County. Like I said, we meet the third Tuesday of every month. If you are interested in joining that, you could, Abby could probably put this in the chat, but you can email me. My name is Emily, and I'm Emily at theproductionfarm.org. Just to give a little background for myself, just to see why I might be qualified to discuss this. I worked at the Head Start program for 11 years, doing enrollment, recruitment, family service, pretty much a little bit of everything. I think I did everything but drive the bus at one point with Head Start, which is a program for families who are in poverty. It's a preschool program, but it's also family education. It's really taking a systemic approach for families in poverty to look for ways to change their lives and to improve the education. You know, kids in poverty start behind immediately in the education system, so they're looking to change that. After that, I worked with sexual assault victims for several years, got my master's degree. I'm a licensed therapist. I worked with runaway and homeless youth for 7 years. I ran the runaway and youth Services Program, the RAISE program in Sheboygan and Manitowoc County, and now I'm working for the production farm with youth with emotional and behavioral health needs that are connected to the CCS program and mental health services. So I have a long-standing experience in both Sheboygan and Manitowoc County working with individuals with experiencing many different needs. We talked about too, is our housing coalition having some of those lived experiences ourselves. Some of the stories that Tracy's telling have interwoven into my life throughout history as well. So our kids went to daycare together when they were little, not the daycare you're referring to.
No.
So
Let's
it
be
was a
clear
good
about
place.
that.
Our kids got along really well. That was an in-home that worked, and it was more affordable, but it definitely made a difference in the ability to afford to live, getting into a good, affordable childcare. So when we look at that as well, Abby, what's your email address in case they want to join the Housing Coalition or get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'll add it in the chat. I added yours as well.
Okay.
I do really quick want to read a question from
Go ahead.
an M. Quinn. It says, do you know, and this is probably for Emily Kaiser,
Excellent.
do you know when there will be current data for ALICE? I would think that the pandemic has added an additional challenge to many individuals and families.
So they typically come out every 2 years. This one that had the 2018 data was actually released in 2020, so right kind of when the pandemic was hitting. But the one that is generally comes out in 2022, I believe, is going to be pushed back a year because of the shift in how they're going to be pulling data and what they're going to be looking at differently, being mindful of COVID and kind of the impacts that that's had as well. And we at United Way will push that out as soon as that comes out as well. So we'll release the information, and we'll have more information as soon as we're aware.
One of the wonderful things about United Way is that they're really open and forthcoming with any data they collect. So you can actually go on their website and see presentations about ALICE. If you want more information, it's quite a bit more detail, I think, even than you gave us today.
Yes.
If you like the statistics, there you go. But it's just wonderful data. There's also some PDFs that have some of those statistics on them as well. So United Way website has a lot of great information, and we'll probably have that one in updates and more presentations on that moving forward.
Yeah, and an easy website to go to if you're interested, it's just unitedforalice.org. So that website, unitedforalice.org, it has interactive where you can go by county, so you can see a lot of the stuff I shared today was specific to Sheboygan County. You can look up by county, you can look by state, you can look specifically at housing or transportation or different buckets of need as well. So that's a pretty nice website to look at as well.
Okay, perfect.
Hey, Joe, do you want to tell them a little bit about getting ahead and when maybe you run those classes?
Yeah, because of COVID, there's been kind of a lag in the system, but we use local churches, or at the Housing Authority, one of the buildings, we've run a getting ahead, and also at one of the local churches. And it's made up of, we interview individuals, we meet with them, and we talk about what getting ahead is trying to do, and what making changes in their life, and the person has to be feeling motivated about doing that, and it's pretty important and we see some drop off, but then, that's, maybe they'll show up the next time around. We never hold that against them. Certainly, we sit around the table and we become what's called family. We actually call one another, oh, this feels like family, because it's like a kitchen, it's called a kitchen table model, and it is growing together as a group and coming up with solutions as a group and as individuals also. So it isn't about somebody telling anyone of anything, and certainly if you want more information on that, the Sheboygan St. Vincent de Paul runs that program, and you can call out there and we'll get you a brochure, and if you wanted to be part of that group, we're always able to meet with someone about the Getting Ahead group. So,
Excellent.
I just wanted to mention that understanding concepts of housing and homelessness on February 3rd will be the next level. It's the next step. Each one is building on each one. So I hope that you join us this next time, because some of those questions that were in the chat will apply for that. And as time goes on, the next ones will apply more, and we're trying to build solutions here.
Yeah, and it'll be, registration will be available early in the next coming week, so that's January 24th is Monday. So I probably start looking for it on Monday. It's same time, 5:30 to 7:30, so 2 Thursdays from now on February 3rd. And that is the understanding of concepts of housing and homelessness. So we'll talk about like the spectrum of housing, types of housing that we have in, Sheboygan County, and then also what homelessness look like here. So that's a little bit about the one that's coming up. I don't know if there's anything else. I don't see any more questions in the chat.
Joe's like, we're going home.
Hey, getting done early, no one ever complains about getting done early either, so.
Does anyone on the panel have any questions for anyone else? I mean, like, this is kind of our first time hearing each other's, anything come up? Anybody take any notes? I hate when everyone's quiet.
I mean, I took a lot of notes, and I think like some of the things that I'm in the next presentation. I think there's a lot of things that the group that I'm presenting with are talking about that kind of
Build
on top of yours and connect with what you guys said. So I think if you attend all 4, you're going to get more out of it than just one, but you'll get something out of every single one. So
yeah, Abby's really selling it.
yeah.
So come to
will-
the next one and invite your friends and neighbors to the next one as well.
Will the next one be its own link for the go-to then?
Yeah.
Each one? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just see Jennifer Rutten commented. She wanted me to give a shout out. I appreciate her so much. We have our point in time homeless count coming up.
Why would we miss that?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Right?
But it's not necessarily part of this, but a point in time homeless count, where volunteers from the community, they go out and they search for individuals who might be sleeping unsheltered. That is from January 26th at 11 p.m. until the early morning hours, so 6 a.m. on January 27th. If we do find somebody, we try to get them connected to resources that might help them become sheltered, if they want those. Otherwise, we also have backpacks filled with food and hygiene products. So if you're interested in volunteering, I did put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me.
And just as someone who's done this for many years, I've been part of the pit count. It sounds scary in theory. It's really, everyone that's ever done it has been safe. We go out in teams of people. No one's expected to go out alone. So basically you go into the community and you have a route that you follow, which is clearly documented where you're going to be. And then you document where you were. And if you do come across someone who you think might be homeless, you ask them a series of questions. Are we doing contact or no contact this time?
If somebody is willing to talk to you, yes, but we try to stay as social distance as possible. Our community does have an amazing after-hours plan now in which we can put individuals, if they are found in the middle of the night and can't go to an emergency shelter, we have the potential to put them in a hotel or motel. And that's thanks to the Housing Coalition and, kind of changing and being more action-oriented, so.
And the police department.
And
Yeah,
the police
and the collaboration
department.
with the police department,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, as Abby said, the first choice would be the warming center, and the warming center will accept individuals 24, well, not 24/7 because they're not open during the day, but in the evenings all night with a police escort. So that service is, even though they have an entrance time, can be adjusted for that. If the warming center is full, we do have that option for the non-emergency police number for support for the after hours program. So that is something that got together from the Housing Coalition, which is fantastic. So,
So the Salvation Army, the Warming Center, the Housing Authority, Lake Shore CAP, those are some of the groups that will be participating in the next event. So,
should be fantastic. And I think the layout's gonna be similar to what we had this time, that it's presentation, lived experience, question and answer. So expect some consistency from us there as well.
so think about some questions and answers too.
And if you don't wanna hear us ramble on for a half an hour afterward, then come with questions. That's my final word on that.
There are a few questions I think I saw in the registration that we already could answer next time, so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I really do appreciate everyone who's out there who is tuning in, because that really speaks to us that they want, the group and people, citizens and everyone that's involved want to know more about housing and Sheboygan and get them good.
Okay.
Improvement. That's right, that's very Sheboygan, I'm very Sheboygan, so.
So thank you very much. I think is where we're gonna leave things off. Thank you for participating. Thank you, everyone who was involved in this. Do we, like, Emily, you wanna bang the gavel so we can go out of here?
She hit the gavel, so we're good.
Have a good evening. We look forward to seeing you next time.